Welcome everybody to this Scotch talk on grant writing and foundation fundraising. Probably we'll have some people still trickle in here as things go along, and a lot of people listen to these later. So we'll just go ahead and get going because we will start on time and we will end on time. We'll end at 4:00 Eastern. My name is Jeremy Beer. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Amphil, and I am joined today by my colleagues Ian Bernhoft and Stephanie Danselmi, and we're going to talk to you about how organizations can increase their foundation fundraising success. And we are taking questions on that topic wherever you want to go. This is very informal. We don't have like a lecture prepared for you. At least I don't have a lecture prepared for you. I don't think Ian or Stephanie has a lecture prepared for you. So this is a conversation, and it's supposed to be a very casual conversation, as the term Scotch talk suggests. We'll come back to that. Let me introduce Ian and Stephanie first, and then we'll get going. Ian Bernhoft is our managing consultant of writing and communications. He came to Amphil. He's an academic refugee, has a PhD in English from Boston University, taught at Providence College, right, Ian? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It actually does not say that on your official Amphil bio. I don't know if that's intentional on your part.
Well, I taught at a lot of places between getting my PhD and now. Okay. So I just say New England, which
New England.
Almost, it could be that I'm just considering the fact I'm at Harvard, but
That's right. That's right. He taught writing, he taught rhetoric. He's a wonderful person to learn from on the art of rhetoric, the art of writing to persuade. He's written for outlets like Commonweal, Modern Fiction Studies, the Cormac McCarthy Journal. In fact, Ian, I suggested today we are lifting a glass in memory of Cormac McCarthy, right? Cheers. If you're on this call, we'll get to what you're drinking here in a second, but we will also, Stephanie, I have someone for you to honor when we get to you. But so this is, we dedicate this Scotch talk to Cormac McCarthy. There's probably nothing he would hate more.
He's so proud.
Yeah, but that's cool. So if you have questions about Cormac McCarthy, you can ask Ian. He knows all that stuff. So we're happy to have Ian on here today. We'll learn a lot from him. And Stephanie is a senior consultant here at Amphil in our consulting division. She works out of one of our groups on the East Coast, out of the Philadelphia area, right, Stephanie?
Yep.
Recently returned from Rome, where she was for a year and a half living with her husband, who is pursuing his
second PhD.
So you may commiserate with Stephanie if you wish. Put comments in the chat of commiseration. Stephanie went to the Eastern University at the Templeton Honors College at Eastern University. Worked at various places, but WHYY was the last place she worked, I think, before coming to Amphil. If you're in the Philadelphia area or ever been there, you know that WHYY is the public TV,
PR, PBS affiliate.
Yeah.
Your home station for Terry Gross.
Your home station for Terry Gross. So I'm sort of the Terry Gross of Amphil, wouldn't you say, Stephanie, in many ways?
I would definitely say that. First thing I would say about you.
And Stephanie is an oboist, correct?
Yes. Yep.
And so I suggest that now that I'm introducing you, we also raise a glass in honor of another great writer who died just last week. Who am I talking about? A musician and writer, Jimmy Buffett.
Oh yeah.
Right? Who would absolutely appreciate our drinking on a Thursday in the middle of the day. I think this toasting people who've recently died, I think it's something I'm going to continue to do is with these Scotch talks.
I'm going to start on a dark note.
Yes.
Perspective.
I think Cormac McCarthy, Jimmy Buffett, yeah, they definitely had different personality. Yeah.
Tomorrow.
All right. So we want your questions. I'm going to start us off with some questions, but put your questions in the chat. Or even better, in the Q&A. I will definitely try to monitor the Q&A. Sometimes the chat, if you guys all get going, it's hard. But I would also like to hear from you, if you don't mind, right now, put in the chat like where you're from, what you're drinking, if you are joining us today with a drink in your hand, and what institution or organization you're with. that is helpful. As we answer questions or as I form questions, I often see where people are coming from. It's like, shift things towards higher ed or healthcare or policy, whatever you might be in. So would love to get that from you in the chat if you don't mind sharing. You don't have to. All right. Thank you very much for getting us going. Let's get going. So we have very different levels of people usually in these Scotch talks. Some people who are very new to the topic, in this case, grant writing and foundation fundraising. Sometimes people who are experts at it and you're just looking for a tip or two. So we're going to try to cover that spectrum. I'm going to start us out though, Stephanie Danselmi, with just the basics. What kinds of different foundations are there? Can you just sort of speak to that? And then that's a two-part question to get us going. And then where do we find them? So then we'll get to actually how we do the grant writing and the foundation fundraising. But let's start with what are the different kinds of foundations and how do you go about finding ones that are good for you?
Sure. I think the two main types of foundations are, a small family foundation and a big staffed foundation. So while foundations, you think it's probably always going to be something that's really formalized or maybe has a grant portal or something like that. Oftentimes, families will establish a foundation just for tax purposes and still act more like an individual donor. So there's a really wide range of people we're talking about when we say, foundation executives, people who work at foundations. But you find them in a variety of ways. I mean, if you're working with some tools like GuideStar, Donor Search, Foundation Directory, you might be just going in and looking for foundations based on a project that is coming up. If you're doing something on, a law project and you want to go find foundations, mostly you would look based on who they have supported in the past. That's all publicly available information, which is the great thing about foundations. With individuals, they don't have to tell you who they're donating to, but with foundations, you have a record of where their grants are going. So you can see really easily if you are a good fit for them, and if they are granting a really high or low level, stuff like that can help you pick out like kind of who's a top priority for you. And, there's the classic thing you can do if this is your first foundation ever, right? You've never made any foundation proposal before. You're a local nonprofit in DC. Maybe you want to walk around and take pictures of some donor walls. That's not a bad place to start. But no, there's anything from Googling to formal systems to, there are professional stalkers out there. We have a lot of them at AmPhil.
Go back to the tools. So let's take Faith Murray, who's in our chat here. She's at Conception Seminary College in Missouri. I'm sorry, Faith, I don't know a lot about Conception Seminary College. So I don't tell us in the chat what denomination is. This will help us. But so say you're Faith. Okay, I want to look for foundation support. First of all, what are the necessary tools I absolutely have to have in my tool bag if I'm going to really make a go at this? They're Catholic, by the way, Stephanie. That's helpful.
Perfect. Well, the number one tool is probably, GuideStar or ProPublica. They're free. They're online. All you have to do is have a login. You can go in and search for information on a foundation that you're trying to pursue, and you can, scroll down and see who they've donated to, and you can see if they provide any information about their processes in that 990. That's definitely crucial. Foundation directory is a little bit more detailed. That one you can, if you have a subscription to that, log in and find out, they'll have a profile that says this is their likely low gift, likely high gift, and then a list of all of their grantees by year, which is just much easier to look at and really helpful for, if you see they're giving $20,000 to 10 orgs and 100,000 to one, it's your first time going in. Now, great, I'm going to ask for 20,000 because I'm not going to look a fool by asking for 500,000, which they've never given, that kind of thing. So foundation directory is definitely good for that.
Okay. And then what you mentioned too is, I think you'd also probably write, make a list of comparable organizations, either in your region or in what you do, other Catholic seminaries, perhaps in the United States, maybe other faith-based nonprofits in my part of Missouri, right? And work backwards, right? To see what foundations have supported them.
Yeah, and check out their annual reports if you can. Both foundations and nonprofits will often post their annual reports publicly. Some foundations will go ahead and list everyone that they're giving to, or they'll say these are our 3 concentrations in 2023, all stuff like that on their website. Some are a little bit more hard to pin down, but oftentimes, you know, a gala website or an annual report for the nonprofit itself might say another local seminary received support from, you know, Raskob Foundation or something.
She's throwing out a real foundation there, by the way. All right, Catholic supporting foundation too. So that's the knowledge. All right, well, we'll come back. There's so much more to say about that and many other things. Ian, if I want, so I have found 20 foundations that look good on paper, at least for me to apply to. We'll get back to the relational side of this with Stephanie, but on the writing side, what sort of tools do I need to have in my tool bag for approaching a foundation, right? In terms of the writing. Yeah, well, let's just start there. Like, how do I start?
Yeah, so where I would begin is with a letter of inquiry or an LOI.
Yeah.
And a lot of time people make the mistake of thinking that you kind of need to like throw it all on the table in the LOI. And that's not what you want to do. The LOI is really like a jumping off point to open the door for further conversation, you know, where what you're typically doing is saying, hey, we exist, we're working on this problem, we think you should care about it, we think you do care about it, can we talk more about how we might work on this problem together? And so, you know, an LOI that is just 1 page or you know, 2 pages, one front and back, and just very simply and succinctly runs through those components is a good place to start. We could go into more details, more granular details of an LOI, but that's definitely the first step. You don't want to just like huck all your materials at the foundation. You begin simply and personally.
Do you need a story? Let's hang on the LOI thing for a second. Let's pick somebody else from the chat. Jamie Kopp. She's with Luke's Wings, which provides flights to injured, ill, and wounded soldiers, officers, and veterans, which is a fantastic mission. So let's say she wants to approach the Bernie Marcus Foundation, which I believe does veterans stuff in Atlanta. What like, should there be a story in that LOI about an injured soldier who they provided a flight for, or do you keep that emotional stuff out of something like an LOI?
You should never keep the emotional stuff out of racing.
Good answer.
Yeah, you want to tailor the emotion to your format and to your audience. And so if you're writing like a short, you know, businessy letter, you don't let it all hang out. But yeah, I mean, begin with crisis, right? About like this soldier and why was their life at risk? Why was their prospects of being transported and getting the help they need so dicey? 2 or 3 sentences. How do we save the day? Why is this a big crisis? And then how can we work together and go from there?
How much should you show in an LOI that you have knowledge of what the foundation says it supports? Like, should you really call that out explicitly and how you might fit in? Or
I'd be interested for Stephanie's point of view, but I think that there's only upside in demonstrating that you've done your homework, right? That you're not just firing this off to every single foundation in the directory. You're saying, hey, because you've given to these sorts of organizations and you have a demonstrated commitment to helping veterans in need, I think this would be a good fit for you. And this dovetails into something that I would want to stress maybe repeatedly throughout this hour, is that the more you can present your need for funds as serving the work that the foundation cares about, right? The better. So it's your pitch isn't, hey, we need money so we can do good things. Your pitch is, you really care about this mission. You can work with us to accomplish the things you really care about.
Stephanie, you have thoughts on that?
Definitely agree with that. And also the kind of thing where you're saying, I'm not just saying I'm like these other groups that you're giving to, but there's a way that I know that we'll be able to amplify the impact you're already having through them. Because say you work with a lot of student groups, but we have a database of national organizations. And, you know, if you're helping us to distribute information, we'll be able to you know, raise the boats for your other grantees, which people like. And then the other piece is like maybe a little bit more on the personal side that I don't always necessarily go with, we should partner together. Sometimes you go a little bit more ego driven based on what might be in the research that you find. If you find someone who writes a lot of op-eds, gets interviewed a lot, is really thinking a lot about their philanthropic impact, saying something more like, I would really like to talk to you about what you think of our strategy in Texas, because you are the person who knows.
Yeah. Well, that's the old saw. If you're on, you probably heard this if you're on this call, right? Ask for advice, get money, ask for money, get advice. But asking for advice is almost always a great move rhetorically. It's you putting someone in a position to be helpful to you with their advice, their brain is like pretty hard to resist, I think.
Unless they have their own initiatives, in which case don't use that language, because you can get pigeonholed with, oh, I have this little nonprofit that I run, and now you're just going to partner with them. Now no money's happening and you're doing extra work. But that aside, it's usually a good way to go.
I'm going to stay on this topic a little bit, Stephanie. Let's say I like that. I'm just pulling people out of the chat. This is very helpful to me. I'm Marissa. I saw her in here earlier. She's in foundation relations at the University of Chicago Medical School, I assume. And she's drinking water. Okay, so should I drop doing LOI to a foundation? And by the way, let's clarify. A lot of foundations will say we don't accept unsolicited proposals, right, Stephanie?
Yes.
So does that mean we should not reach out to them in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, blacklist them, take them off all your lists. No, it means basically it's not a no. They've responded to you. You're doing well. So even if you're the foundation's officer and you're trying to report to your boss and you get 10 meeting request letters out and 2 people say we're not accepting grantees, I would say getting those 2 responses was partially a success. And then you have to continue that relationship by doing something like, thanks so much for letting me know where you are right now. Is it okay if I keep you in the loop with other projects that might be more aligned with your work in the future? And then set something like, if you're using something to manage when you're reaching out, a calendar, grants calendar, moves management system, just go ahead and move them to 3 months from now. Remember to set an update of some sort to this person. I had a group yesterday who just got an invitation to submit a proposal from a meeting request that they started following up on in April of 2022. He sent a meeting request, got no response. He followed up, got no response, followed up again, we're not accepting any grantees anymore. He said, I will keep you in the loop, whatever. They didn't respond. He reached out, gave them an annual report. He reached out again a couple months later with another meeting request letter. And we did this for 1.5 years, and he just got a meeting and an invitation to submit. So it's not usually true when they say they're not accepting new people. It just means they don't know who you are. You're never going to become one of their people that they invite back every year. And with foundations, it's a little different than with major donors who it might take it more personally. Foundations, their job is to find places to give money to. So they are not going to be personally offended that you're continuing to do follow-up for the most part.
Most people don't follow up enough. Good.
Yeah.
Stephanie, do you think that sometimes people are a little bit skittish about following up enough? They think, oh, I wrote to them 6 months ago. They're going to be annoyed if I write to them again. Is that a thing that happens?
I think that is an understatement. A bit skittish is an understatement. I think almost every single person on this call, if you tripled the amount of follow-up you were doing, you would be in a good place. I would love to find the one of you who that's not true for. Raise your hand if you're doing 18 follow-ups or something. But yeah, for generally and for the most part, people don't remember you as well as you remember you. So
it's general life advice. Yeah.
In a way, like, Jeremy was saying that foundation's job, their job is to find a good place to give money. You're ultimately like providing them a service and helping them remember what their options are, right?
Yeah.
So
right.
They rejected you last time. If you
Right.
sent them a note like, hey, what's up now? Maybe they're not interested, but they might be like, oh yeah, that is a possibility, and I might have money to
Right.
send.
We're going to come back to Ian in a second about the secrets of grant writing. That's next. But I want to get back to my friend Marissa here in the chat. Okay. She's at University of Chicago Medical School. In a meeting request letter, which often you'll say, if you want to get a meeting, you send a meeting request letter. We call them MRLs. I don't know if anybody else does. It might be an email. It might actually be a real live letter, because live letters actually are still a thing. We can talk more about that if you want. How much name dropping should she do? So she sees that the foundation is supporting another medical school in the, at the Northwestern Medical School or something, or, whatever. Or somebody that, on their board knows somebody at the foundation, should you be, how much kind of name dropping should you do in a letter of inquiry or meeting request letter to try to break the ice? That's Stephanie. That's for you. Then we'll go back to Ian.
Okay, great. Definitely do some name dropping. I think I probably, the standard if you're doing a print would probably be to include a few more names than an email. If you're doing a print meeting request letter, we usually do 3. So we say, you've supported X, Y, and Z people, and we usually pick something based kind of on how much they're giving. Like if you see that they give from $10,000 to $1 million, don't pick the 3 that they give $1 million to, because in their mind, they're probably not going to identify you with the 3 people that they're most loyal to in the entire world right off the bat. So pick, something a little bit smaller, something in the middle, and then just make sure all 3 things are pretty aligned with what you're doing. But name dropping is always good. I do a little bit less of it via email because people do tend to reply to the super brief things or something a little bit catchier and personal. Yeah, but both ways.
Good. All right, Ian, I just gotta keep moving this along. I can actually talk about this stuff the whole time, but let's talk about the actual grant writing. So we were at a point, for whatever reason, it's a foundation maybe we already have an association with, or they just have an open proposal process. I'm sitting down and writing a grant. What are the most, we can go over the sections of a grant and everything like that, but actually I want to ask you, like, what are the most common mistakes people make? Let's go right to the negative. Like, what do people do wrong most often in their grants?
I think that, as with life, so also with grant writing, we tend to become somewhat buried in the particulars of our situation. That's a very abstract way. So let me concretize it. When you're writing a grant, it feels like this arduous process of application. Like you're applying for a passport, only it's asking you a lot more sort of like substantive questions. And I think that leads us into making a couple of pitfalls. Of viewing it almost as this sort of transactional bureaucratic procedure. And I grant you, it is arduous.
Pun intended.
You have to move beyond that. And remember, I'm not writing an application in which I unveil everything about myself and try to justify myself so that a robot spits out money at me. Rather, I'm writing something which is going to be read by a real human being, and which the fate of this application rests in the hands of actual real human beings. And as such, I think two mistakes come from two areas of mistake come from this original misconception of seeing it as a transactional bureaucratic process and not as a relational process. One of those mistakes is that we end up just talking about our own work, our own needs, our own desires, our own goals. It's us. Please give us money because we're great. Instead of framing things persuasively in terms of the interests, the wants, the needs, the goals of the foundation. So part of this is at a very basic, just syntactic level, not saying, send us money so that we can save injured veterans. It would be saying, we can work together to save injured veterans, or like the foundation's support will go directly to saving injured veterans. Like this is something that you, the foundation, are doing. So that's one area, is really trying to pitch it not in terms of just self-justification, but rather in terms of what does the foundation care about, and namely that is doing the good that they exist to do, and so making them the hero, not yourself the hero. And then on just more sort of like practical, kind of like person to person level, think about the person who's having to read through your grant application. It's probably someone who has to read through a bunch of grant applications. It's probably someone who has to compile a board book, if the foundation is of any size, of small, snapshots of why this proposal should be funded. So what do you want to do? You want to write things simply. You want to have a very tight story up front, which can be just copied and pasted into that board book. You don't want to go into a ton of detail. You don't want to use a ton of long abstract language. The more you can make that person's job easy, so they can just skim through your grant and say, oh, I get it. I like it. So it'd be easy to just like explain to the board why this is a good proposal. I think the better your chances of getting funded are. Whereas if you give something which is highly detailed, highly complex, hard to read, you're making that person's job hard, and they're more likely to just be like, you know what, I don't have time for this. So remember that you're dealing with people, and that you need to frame things in terms of what they care about, and you need to make their job easier. I think that's like the overarching advice that I always give.
Yeah. I think people don't often think about like, well, how does this work? What are the mechanics behind the scenes? What happened? And as you're getting to it's very rare, I think, that your application would put in wholesale into a board book for board members to vote yay or nay on, right? It's going to be summarized by a person on the other end for the board to make their job easy and make it easy for them to relate it to what the foundation's priorities are. Okay, I'm gonna answer a few questions here and have you guys answer a few questions from the chat. Because they're sort of relevant. Stephanie, to Ian's point, should you always use up all available characters in a proposal? You'll see it's like, 3,000 characters in this box can be used, or 1,000. Should you use every one of them?
I would say you should usually get pretty close. I mean, hopefully you're working off of an established template that you send to other orgs that don't have portals. And most of that language is probably going to be long enough that you have to cut it down, not beef it up. But if you do find yourself in a situation where you have a lot of leftover characters, I think it's okay in certain places of the portal, like often in a goals section. If they're giving you 10,000 characters, you probably don't really need to use that much. You might want to do something like 50% at least, so it doesn't look like you're just not answering the question. But generally, I would fill it out at least 3/4 of the way or so. But the battle is usually the opposite. The battle is usually getting it small enough for the portal.
Ian talked about this being looking at it like a relational process, not a transactional process. And we've had a chatter here, Tom Bacco, jump in and say, yeah, that goes for the follow-up too, the reporting. Stephanie, speak to that. Like, to what extent is a grant or a letter of inquiry simply a step in a relationship building process more than it is anything else?
About 100%. The only difference really between foundation relationships with a portal and without, or between foundations and individuals, is probably that you have to do extra touches. So it's not that you're doing less, it's probably that you're doing more. If you're filling out a portal and submitting it, and then you're not following up with that person by email or reaching out to, you don't want to just be hitting submit and hoping for the best. You want to be following up like, hey, thank you so much for the opportunity. We just submitted. Let me know if you want more information. I hope that you in particular look at the section number 3, because I think you're going to be most excited about this program, something like that. So trying to just make it personal to them, to the person who's actually going to be reading stuff, is super important, in keeping it relational. So do more, not less, if you have a portal involved.
I'm going to also exercise executive privilege here and give it's not just the follow-up, right? It's the pre and surround work that happens. So if you're local, let me pick somebody in here. Somebody was doing a chorus in Chicago, right? You want to do the best you can, Melissa, you or your CEO, executive director, board, to be where foundation funders are and bump into them in person. So not only do you want to ask for meetings, right? If at all possible, you want to get part of grant writing is meetings. These are not separable things. You want a meeting before the grant, you want a meeting to go over the grant if possible. You'd love to have a meeting after the grant. All the meetings you can get are good, but also just to build up some sort of recognition in the community. I will say somebody very close to me, working as a grant writer for her career, and the difference in success in those grants from the organization that had a presence in the community and the executive director went to 200 events a year. I'm not even joking, like crazy, versus one who didn't get out as much. It's really big, and there's no blame there. They're busy people, but it's like being visible as a person, and so therefore allowing relationships to be developed, however small they may seem to you, will help your grant succeed, perhaps more than any technique we can talk about here today.
Yeah, which includes managing up. If you're the foundation's director at your organization and your CEO is the one going to the events, get her calendar, and then when you know she's going somewhere, see if you can get the list of who else is going, and then send 3 bullet points. I see Daniel's fund is going to be there. Just so you know, we just sent over 2 1-pagers and we were going to have a call later this month. Can you check in on this or that? So if you, because a lot of your success is going to get stuck with someone else if you're not the one who's doing the relationship building, but there's stuff you can do to keep it going.
Excellent. Well, Nicole from the Policy Circle just hit on the question that we have on our list. Let's just go to it now, Ian. It's a big old AI question. By the way, this entire thing right now is happening via AI. I'm not here. Stephanie's not here. No, I'm just kidding. This is a lie, but it's a good question, Ian. How are people using, or how could you use right now AI in your grant writing and foundation fundraising?
So I think at this point, and I say this with the caveat that I know it's a rapidly changing technology, and what I say today could be obsolete in 6 months, but I think right now you don't want to use it to write for you, because it does have that impersonal, soulless cyborg stank on it, I think. Even if you prompt it well, and there's part of the work, I'm sure you all know if you've done anything with it, is garbage in, garbage out. You have to put a lot of work into the prompting to get a good result. But where I've found AI to be really useful is more in the review stage. So you take something and you say to your chat GPT, assume you're an expert fundraiser and a good proofreader, can you please give me a bulleted list of suggestions about what you would do with this that I paste? You don't want it to do the edits for you, because it does foolish things, and it makes things worse. It makes things more anodyne, more milquetoast, etc. But if you ask it to give you bulleted suggestions, it'll catch errors in formatting, it'll catch errors in language, it'll evaluate you, and you can take it or leave it. So I think that using it as a sort of like editor or as a proofreader is a really productive way to use it. The other thing I would say is, if you're writing in a new genre, or if you're doing something for the first time, it's great as a teaching tool. You can say, assume I'm a novice about this, assume you're an expert, give me 20 bullet points that will tell me 80% of what I need to know to do this thing well. And it gives you good results. So I think using it as a instructive source and as a proofreading source is, for now, a really good way to do it. I guess the last thing I would say is, I haven't had luck with it in terms of summarizing complex things without introducing error into it. Like when I feed it long things that I've read and I ask it to summarize it, it gives me things in it that don't actually exist.
Really?
My experience, but
that's really interesting. Nicole, is that helpful? Hopefully it is. Yeah, that's where we are right now. That's a great answer. I didn't know what Ian would say. That's very interesting. And this could really change in 6 months. We'll see. Who knows? All right, we have a couple of questions in the Q&A. I'm just going to go right to those. We have a list of questions on our side, but whether we get to those or not is immaterial. Paige has a question. Stephanie, I'm going to give this to you. And because and if you don't know, that's okay. She'd like to hear more about this board book, right, that exists in the mysterious foundation precincts. They get around their big, fancy table, and they open the board book. What's in there? What are the what specifics from her proposal, she asks, are typically pulled out to share with the board during a meeting?
Oh, I've never seen a board book myself, so I can't say much more than I hope they're including the executive summary at the very least, because that makes a lot of sense. And you better be writing a good executive summary, because that's the one thing is going to be in there.
That is
don't
true.
forget to do something like use their name personally and put a specific amount of money in there. A lot of people forget to put that in the summary. So just assume the worst about people and put it all right up front, I guess.
That is good. That's good advice. I have seen a board book, a number of them, and they obviously they vary. It's not like they all go to board book school and there's like a one way to do board books, but basically they're gonna be like who you are, where you're located, how big you are, how much you raised in the last couple of years. So there could be stats that you don't have anything. You may have provided some of these stats. Some of them can be pulling from your 990s. They're gonna say what area of the foundation's giving that you are applying to, or they think you fit in potentially. And yeah, executive summary. Sometimes they're going to really pull out like outcomes. I'm gonna put you guys on the spot. We just talked about this. We're gonna outcomes and impact. What are the outcomes that you are saying would come out of this project, and what impact would it have? Ian, what's the difference between those two things?
Yeah, the way I think about it is sometimes you'll see it as outputs and outcomes and impact. You want to distinguish between the immediate fruits of your labor and basically the why what's downstream of that. Why does it matter? So an immediate outcome is we'll run 12 classes on, and it will run classes on 12 campuses around the country that'll teach people how to invest better or something like that. The impact is, well, why does that matter? What's downstream from that? So impact is going to be a little bit more aspirational. But I think, to come back to a note I sounded earlier, both of those you want to frame in terms of things that the foundation would accomplish through you.
Is it okay to use language the foundation itself uses to basically crib? I mean, maybe not wholesale, but like to spit back segments of phrasing and terminology that the foundation uses about itself and what it's trying to accomplish?
I think doing some of that is good because it shows you've done your homework. Again, I would use a light touch and not shoehorn full sentences, especially if it seems like it's incongruous with what surrounds it. So
yeah, a light touch.
But hopefully you know which are the words that are like the in speak. Use all the in speak, right? We've got a great Philanthropy Daily piece about buzzwords from Austin Detweiler, one of our guys here, where I thought, I started reading it and I was like, oh, he's going to say don't use them because they're boring. And he actually says do use a lot of them, because if they're using that to distinguish, are you one of us or one of them, and you don't use their words, they're not going to identify with you.
Yeah. Be an us. Be part of the us, not part of the them, if you can. All right, Stephanie, let's stay with you. What's your Tom Bacco asks? Anyway, hello, Tom. What is your take on proposal design? He has personally always been a minimalist, no unnecessary graphics, cover pages, fancy fonts, or whatever, but he's seen others do otherwise. How much do you think visual design matters?
I actually am a huge fan of designed templates for proposals, but I've seen like the big high glossy design that you can go for ends up being this big PDF where you have to have your designer change every little word and then things get pushed onto the next page. That I wouldn't do on almost any case unless your nonprofit specifically does design for some reason. Go ahead and do it. But in the middle area that I really like is kind of a designed word template. In Microsoft Word, you can use styling on the back, pick your fonts that go with your brand, pick your brand colors, do a little splash of color on the side in some way or another, have, headers, footers, and a cover page. The main thing I really like in the designed templates is that it makes it really scannable. So if you're using, like, I have styling for heading 1, 2, and 3, and then I use those for various things, someone can read your proposal from top to bottom just looking at the headings and see everything that's in it in a way that just having an underlined bolded thing in Times New Roman is not really going to do. And then you can do something like getting back to the impact kind of reporting, because that is something that a lot of foundations are pretty obsessed with, popping out something like, say you have an economic center that writes white pages and does all sorts of whatever, right? You're telling them this is person who's leading it. These are the initiatives that we're pursuing this year. These are the model policies that we're writing. And then you do like a little text box with a picture and some stylized writing that says like, measurable impact. Our economic think tank paper was reviewed by 16 people in Congress, and one of them said X. So you can use design to pop out things that are really like storytelling based. But I like that kind of middle design where you don't have to get anyone else involved. You don't have to use a designer to do it, but you can just make it easier to scan through. And I think there was a point where I didn't like that very much, but I had one of our designers here go through a proposal that I had done. And after he designed it, I understood that organization better. I'd been working with them for like 2 years, and I didn't until I saw it all laid out the way that he put it. It just like opened something for me. So I had kind of a conversion on the designed proposals. Maybe you'll have something like that.
A good design aids rhetoric, right? It helps tell the story better. And I would say, I'll just suggest this. I don't know if this is true. If I'm one of the smaller organizations, I'm going to go back to the chorus. Our friend with the chorus, she said it's a new chorus. Like, one of the biggest obstacles you encounter with a foundation is they're thinking like, are you real? Are you going to last? are you is this real? If you present a nicely designed proposal, or if even if it's just a portal, but it allows you to attach something, you can attach a nicely designed piece of collateral that tells your story. To me, that's one thing that can help overcome are these guys for real question. Are they professional? Do they know what they're doing? Or can I trust them with my money? Ian, do you think that's true?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also think, coming back to considering the needs of your reader, that again, anything you can do to make it easier for them to grasp your story quickly, like Stephanie was saying, is good. So I think that, paying careful attention to headings, both that they're nested in a way that visually makes sense, and that the headings tell the story, is really important, because it makes it so much easier to quickly apprehend what you're all about.
Yeah, we're getting good questions here, so I'm going to keep going with the audience questions. I'm going to try to get to everyone we have. There's a couple in the chat. There's one more in the Q&A. Hey, Stephanie. Katie Lopez asks, how do you know if a grant or foundation supports a faith-based organization?
Support a specific faith-based organization?
I think they mean it supports faith-based organizations.
Yeah. Well, a lot of that, my answer is that I ask our research people and they always have that information. But I think where they're finding it is in annual reports. They're seeing who they've donated to in the past. A lot of the time it's looking up the news articles that have mentioned the, executive director or something, and seeing if they're being published in faith-based places. But I think the giving history is really the best place.
I think it's just giving history. I think because sometimes, obviously, if the foundation says we support Christian organizations or Jewish organizations, whatever, you got your answer. But if they don't say that, if you just look at their giving history, just scan the 990, and if you see, a Christian school in there or an LDS school or whatever, then you're getting your answers. Giving histories give you more answers than what a foundation says about itself, about everything. So taking the time to scan through the last several years 990s, I think always is like, that tells you so much. And that, Katie Lopez, I think that would tell you your answer better than anything else. I hope that's helpful. All right, we got some others here. Yes, foundation directory will tell you, they might mark off, we do this or that, but still the giving history should be important. Oh gosh. Okay. Ian, I'm going to give you the tough question. Back to Faith Murray here about DEI. How do you navigate questions about DEI? That's going to have a very different answer for the different organizations that are on this call. Obviously, it is a loaded topic, as she points out. How do you navigate that in the application or proposal process, especially if you're asked specifically to comment on it?
I think that if it's something that's going to disqualify you, that you can't fudge your way through it. Like if for example, if a foundation is committed to only funding organizations which have a certain, manifest commitment in terms of like the composition of their board or their members or whatever to DEI, no amount of sort of like nice sounding euphemisms are gonna get you over that hurdle. I think that so that's the first caveat, is you might just run up against the wall. If that's not the case, and you're not sure how to answer, I think that the way to do it genuinely is to do the politician's old trick of answering the question you want to answer. So like, and I might be going, I might be going off the ranch here, and you should haul me back in. But like, if you think, gosh, we don't have, like any sort of like racial diversity initiatives or like whatever. Well, think about, what do those terms, how does your organization authentically actually try to live out, a mission of equality or of outreach or of welcoming people from different backgrounds, and just talk about that. I think that if you try to paper over the absence with buzzwords, it's gonna ring false. So I think you just have to answer it in the terms that your organization can stand behind, and hope for the best.
Stephanie, do you have a thought on that?
I would say be unapologetically yourself, whatever that is. If this is an answer that you don't want to give because you really don't agree with putting people in those kinds of categories at your organization, you probably don't want to suddenly be getting $500,000 from this foundation that's really pushing that. Because all it's going to do is create a strained relationship. And then year in, year out, you're going to be trying to convince these people that really you can align. So if you can't answer that question because you don't align with the way they think about it, you might want to go after different foundations.
All right, I have a third
Strong arm you.
as well. I have a third answer also. If you're really not sure, you think it might be a good fit, or not sure what direction this question could be taken, you could call the foundation. Use it as an excuse to try to have a conversation with the grant officer at the foundation. Sometimes it's like, yeah, we have this question, but we realize, that certain of our grantees are going to have a different kind of answer to it than others. Like, just do your best. It's cool. You might get that kind of answer. You might others like, hey, no, we really have to. If you don't have 50% persons of color on your board, you're not going to get a dime from our foundation. So, you should probably not submit. I mean, I would just try to take their temperature. The foundations are all different kinds of beasts, and as DEI, it can take all sorts of different kinds of forms. So I don't know if that's helpful at all to the person who answered the question, but I hope it's slightly helpful. It's one of those things that has to be answered in the particular more than the abstract, probably. But I think those are good answers you guys gave. I want to go back, Stephanie, to a question that was asked earlier about taking advice. Hey, isn't it dangerous asking for advice unless you plan to take it? What do you think about that from a donor officer, gift officer perspective?
I think I wouldn't be too afraid. I'd be more afraid of not reaching out than I would be of receiving too much advice. I mean, if you are asking for money from someone, if you're saying, hey, please give us $500,000 and don't give us any input into how we're running our organization, you're probably not going to have the greatest relationship with them anyway. I mean, definitely people can be really idiosyncratic and get really into their own thing, but most gifts officers are personally skilled in a way where you can kind of try to put the conversation back into something that you're doing, or say, oh yeah, that's exactly what we were thinking when we did X, Y, and Z, and kind of, massage it into emphasizing the things that you're already doing that align with what they're bringing out. So some of it's just going to be like you got to be on the fly, but I think not being afraid to ask is still important, because you're not just asking for money. It is, a relationship anyway.
Well, also, I think you can frame the request in more open-ended ways, right? Instead of, you're not saying like, please meet so that you can guide us in this next step, right? It's more like, we'd love to pick your brain. We know you know a lot about this space, and I'd love to get your input on what you think is working the best. And that doesn't bind you to like following or rejecting your advice. You're just looking for conversation.
Yeah, and it is important, I think. That fear that's there, and you're right, Faith. I think you asked that question too. Like, you could get some crazy advice. Donors will give you crazy advice. It's way off, and that's just the art of being a nonprofit leader or fundraiser. Is partly resides in how you deal with that situation. How can you redirect? How can you tactfully explain that would take you off mission, but give them a chance to speak into something that wouldn't? That's the art. And that's a lot of learning by doing in that, because that's going to happen. And if you never ask for advice, if you're always one talking and you don't want any feedback, or ask for feedback, you're not going to build very strong relationships. So it's a risk. It's an existential risk that must be taken. All right. Let's see. Looks like I've almost, Carol asked, and I'm not sure exactly where you're going with this, Carol. I assume it's with like a portal application or something, but how much should one rely on hyperlinking to direct the reader to your organizational content? Ian, I'm going to ask you to answer that as best you can.
Again, let's think about what human beings are like. And if you're skimming something, just, doing your job, trying to figure out, is this a possibility or not? Are you going to go through and click on all those links? Probably not, right? Like, I guess there's no harm in including some hyperlinking, but you can't, your application can't hinge on that. You have to look at it the same way, like, the endnotes or the appendix in a book might be like, sure, if somebody's really curious, they can look back there and be edified, but that can't be where the story is. I guess that's my main thought.
Yeah. Yeah, don't count on anybody ever actually like doing it. So don't hide anything important there. I think that's a good answer. All right, any more questions? We got 10 more minutes. Stephanie, we talked a lot about, you talk about, hey, it's nice to design things well. If you use the styles well, even in Word, you can really tell the story just with the headings. But more and more, I think it's fair to say, I'm very curious how AI will change this. Portals, foundations use portals, and there's no design possibilities. There's character limits. We talked about that a little bit. How does a portal application process change things from what you might do in a free form proposal?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it can be faked at least. If you're just doing something as simple as saying the 3 things we're doing this year are colon and then putting 1, 2, and 3, that can help still to break things up a little bit in a plain text way. So I would encourage using little dashes if you don't have bullets, using like just all caps for section headings, stuff like that. Super simple stuff can still be helpful. But I mean, most of the way to change your writing for a grant proposal, I would just dig my heels into everything that Ian already said to try to remember that there's a person on the other side of it. But you can also, one thing that I've seen as sort of a fatal mistake a lot of times actually is people will go through a portal at process and concentrate so much on all of the questions. At the end, there's this section for like additional attachments and it doesn't have any information. It's not saying upload a proposal, but they're giving you an opportunity to do that. I would say don't try to cut corners. Do go ahead and do the whole proposal as your designed proposal. Use that beautiful template that you have and don't forget to upload it. If there's no opportunity for something like that, you can still go back and share something like a nice 1-pager via email in a couple months to check in. Like, hey, since we wrote last to you in the portal, we've had a few great wins. I wanted to share this. So there are opportunities to kind of have more pretty designed or personal touches along the way. So try not to let those fall by the wayside.
The way I think about this is, like if you're on the other end, you're trying to separate signal from noise. If you're at the foundation, if you're the grant maker, right? And so, anything you can do to get more signal to come through past the noise seems to be good. And I don't think it's even necessarily articulated by the grant maker or the grant officer or whoever it might be, the donor themselves on the other side. But anything that shows that separates you in a positive way, like following up, like you were saying, right? Or with some that may, I'm getting signal of professionalism here. I'm getting signal of energy here. I'm getting signal of people who are passionate about what they do and are really are like working their butts off to get it done. Like if you can send that signal, that's just think about the signals you're trying to send, right? And focus your activity accordingly. Ian, do you agree with that?
I do. I don't have anything to add. Seems like
Okay. This, by the way, my AI prediction is, if it gets better, actually writing things. I bet we'll see foundations within a few years, not taking written proposals anymore. I expect it'll be more like the orals you took in school if you got a graduate degree in particular, oral exams, which I think would be a much better way to separate signal from noise. If I were a foundation, if I weren't so lazy, that's what I would do anyway. Get people on a Zoom, look them in the eye, give you 10, 15 minutes to make your pitch, and then get to ask you questions would be a much better way to do the grants process in my opinion. So if you're on this call, get ready to potentially shift to being like performers, Zoom performers, over just writers. Having said that, Ian, back to you. I got a question for you, and then we'll go back to the questions. Actually, you can ask. I'm going to ask you this question because you put it out there to me in the pre-question process. I'm very curious what it is. What is sectional bleed? And it sounds terrible. It sounds like a bad health condition. But what is that? Why is it important to avoid?
Yeah, I think that so sectional bleed, which is a term that I coined with no help from AI, is when in your grant proposal you end up just talking about the same kind of stuff in each thing. So like your solution creeps into the problem statement and your outputs creep into your program overview and so on and so forth. And I think that it's a problem. I think it's a manifestation of a deeper problem, which is that you haven't sort of gotten above the weeds yet and hammered out your story into clearly digestible chunks. And I think that, when I go in to write a proposal, I want to get extremely clear on what is the situation, what is the problem this proposal is targeting, why does it matter, what's our proposed solution, and what are going to be the demonstrable outputs of that solution. And then hovering over that, why does the foundation care about this? And then look at plugging those bits into the relevant parts of the proposal and think about, okay, statement to me that's clearly asking for the articulation of the problem and why it matters. And the more that you can make those parts distinct and then arrange them, coherently, or it's going to be apprehendable by your reader, and they can digest, they can see why you're doing good work, why it matters, why they want to help. I think that when you end up having this, okay, I've got a lot of stuff in my head, we're doing a lot of things, they all kind of flow together, and I'm going to just let it rip across all these sections and maximally include whatever, fill up every last word available. It ends up diluting the power of your message because it's added to the complexity, it's added to the confusion, whereas simplifying is the best way to be remembered.
And
So that's why sectional bleed is bad in
That's a good
French and in
simplifying is the best way to be remembered. Is a quote we can have on your on your epitaph, perhaps.
I think that people, I don't know people, but my suspicion is that people worry that by simplifying, they're going to lose credibility because simplicity might not send those signals you're talking about of professionalism. And so they're like, here are all the details, here are all the stats, here's all the data. Whereas data, stats, and details are also boring and hard to remember. And simplicity can signal confidence and clarity. And those are very attractive.
Yep, that's right. Real, clarity around exactly what you're doing and why. Yeah, that's great. We are coming to an end here. I'm going to answer. There's one more question in the Q&A. I'm going to answer it, and then we'll answer the last question in the chat. Is it a good practice to ask for specific post-mortem feedback on declined proposals, or do foundations get annoyed by that? They absolutely, I would say 100%, it is a good practice. I do not think that the vast majority of foundations get annoyed by that. In fact, usually the feedback we get from foundation people is that they're shocked at how few people ask them for reasons why they were declined, who ask for that feedback. Usually they're happy to give it. Of course, if you do it you can't call them whine, but if you, hey, I'd love to just know more about why we declined. That is so valuable. Like, hey, you know what? Going into this board cycle, in fact, basically every dollar was accounted for. And so we couldn't do it, or some board member came in and we ended up actually tripling the gift to somebody else, so yours was gone. It could have nothing to do with your proposal. Never forget, foundations are fundamentally irrational kind of creatures. So despite everything we just said here, you're dealing with their people in the end, and they have all these other things going on. That's a whole other rant I can do when we have more time. So you should ask for feedback, absolutely, and it could really help you the next time with that foundation or with others. Lastly, Gina Abbey asks for recommendations for resources on foundations and grant writing, like training or courses. I know we'd have that. So if you go to amphil.com and go to, I don't know, Caitlin or John, if you're listening here, maybe you can put a link in the chat. But if you go to amphil.com, I will do that right now as we speak. What is the heading?
I think if you go to our Creative Studio page, there's a link there just to email me directly if people are interested.
Right. So services to Creative Studio, and then we have events, and there's like all stuff in there. But I know that there are free things on there about this that you can access, and so start there. There are other places like the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at IU Indianapolis has resources. So that's just another tip I would give you. I'm sure there are others. Lastly, before I let you go, if you are in the Scottsdale/Phoenix area, or want to be in the Scottsdale/Phoenix area in November when it is lovely, unlike now, but when it's lovely, November 7th and 8th, we were having a conference on the rise of the nuns, what the the decline in religiosity means for philanthropy and civil society, something like that is the title. But basically, it's about the decline in religious affiliation and religiosity and what that might mean for fundraising and for what we fundraise for, civil society. We would love to see you there. Link is in the chat, also online if you go to conference events, conference at anfield.com. So please consider joining us. It will be, I think, a lot of fun. And that's more thinky than it is like fundraising advice, but it's a good break from thinking about fundraising all the time. So thank you all for joining us. Thanks, Ian, Stephanie. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Hope everybody got a little something out of that and appreciate all the great questions. Thanks a lot.